And welcome back to Hour 3 of Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. We appreciate you tuning in and being a part of the show with us. We'll be here with you every Saturday and Sunday night. The best in talk radio in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We've got some calls on the line. If you want to join in and be a part of the show with us, please give us a call. Nick, you on the line with us, right? Nick, we with you?
Yep.
Okay, good. We've got a caller. Looks like Kirsten is calling in. We're going to go ahead and take this call. Kirsten, are you there?
Yep, it's Kirsten, yep.
Oh, Kirsten. Okay, Kirsten, you have a question about the Loch Ness Monster, and you'd like to address it to Nick?
Well, yeah. A lot of people have speculated they just dismiss this out of hand because they think that a creature such as that is too big. There wouldn't be a big enough food source, and or there wouldn't be room enough for, like, a breeding population. What are your thoughts about that scientific way of looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that in terms of the size of the loch, that certainly I think a viable, large enough population of some sort of creature could exist. I mean, as I mentioned at the very start of the show, Loch Ness is actually 22 miles long, nearly a mile wide, and at its deepest point about 800 feet, and there are theories that at some point it may be even near 1,000 feet deep. So in that respect, you know, if you've got a colony of creatures that are averaging anywhere from sort of 15 to 25 feet long, which is sort of pretty much the length that people are talking about, that's not out of the question. Now, there have been some scientific studies done suggesting that there isn't necessarily a large enough fish population like salmon, etc., to support a large colony of flesh-eating creatures. Now, on the other hand, people have said, well, you know, it's difficult to try and make a determination of the population in a lake or loch of that size. So, you know, that's one of those areas that is a little bit of a grey area, I suppose. But certainly in terms of the size of the...
Well, Nick, you said that the water is so black because of what? What goes on in the water that keeps it...
Look, what happens is, because it's surrounded by hills, steep hills, what happens is you get a lot of fall of peat, particularly when it rains.
Well, how do we know that it's not eating the peat then? What makes it a carnivore? Couldn't it be just an herbivore that's eating the peat and the moss that's growing in the lake?
That's the other good point, Dave, is that, you know, people automatically, I think largely due to the media and the Scottish Tourist Board, take the view that if there's something weird in Loch Ness, it has to be a plesiosaur, a surviving dinosaur. Now, mainstream cryptozoologists, a lot of them take a very different view that, yes, there could be something weird in Loch Ness, but why does it have to fit the classic image that everybody knows about? You know, I think the fact that most people report this long neck and kind of humped-like body, people think, well, then it has to be some sort of long neck type creature, and so they go to the ones that everybody knows about, like the plesiosaur. You know, this idea that it could be a large type of eel, you know, people have suggested, well, maybe it's actually not just the neck that people are seeing, that it could actually be, as an eel is, that's the shape it is. So, you know, I actually think there is some merit in this idea that some of these creatures could be large eels, and if that is the case, you know, they could literally feed at the bottom of the loch on decaying creatures, etc., and, you know, they wouldn't be some sort of 30 to 40 foot long flesh-eating predator that would require a massive amount of fish every day.
All right, Kirsten, did you have any other questions to follow up with that?
Nope, not really. That's it.
Well, thanks for tuning in and being a part of the show with us.
And thanks. Congrats on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I mean, you make a lot of good points here, Nick. I mean, there's so many different options for what these things could be. Now, do you honestly believe, though, that a plesiosaur is the most logical explanation? Do you think a dinosaur could still be alive? And if so, does it have to be huge? How do we know that it's not smaller dinosaur-like creatures that swim in a pod that could be causing these waves? And we know that fish that feed and will get frenzied will start creating a huge havoc in the water. Couldn't that be a little pod of these creatures as well?
Well, that's a good point also. I mean, you know, a lot of people who aren't necessarily conversant with many of the reports assume that we are talking about a huge creature.
Right.
There are people who've said, for example, they've seen it basking on the shore, or even a couple of reports, primarily from the 1920s and 30s, of people even saying that they saw it near the road. And they actually did describe something in the region of sort of 15 to 18 feet long, which, you know, isn't that long. It's, you know, 15 feet isn't even 3 times the length of a human being. So, you know, the possibility that we're talking about smaller creatures actually is more likely than not likely. We're not talking about 80, 90-foot long, huge creatures like the equivalent of a seagoing brontosaurus or something like that. So, we could be looking at something like that. And personally, I don't think the plesiosaur is the most viable alternative. What I do think is that the image of how the plesiosaur looks is the one that everybody has latched onto because of people saying the Loch Ness Monster has a long neck.
Right.
My own view, I would, if I was put on the spot, I would veer to more towards something like a large eel. Now, of course, as I said, that might in some respects sort of demystify the image of the Loch Ness Monster because of the name having the Loch Ness Monster. And the Scottish Tourist Board, I'm sure, would be kind of disappointed.
You don't think they want to change it from Nessie to Ely?
Yeah, maybe one day. But I think, that to me, because you have these reports, occasional reports of it on land, some people have said that, these creatures have been seen in other lochs, and they certainly have, like Loch Morar, which is another very large loch in Scotland. And one of the theories is because eels can actually, leave water, maybe these things have actually kind of migrated in night from one loch to another, and that could explain the presence of these creatures in different lochs rather than just one. Rather than if it was just like a creature like a plesiosaur, which wouldn't, certainly migrate across Scotland in the middle of the night or whatever. So.
Right. Well, we are taking calls. You can chime in on Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show with our guest, Mr. Nick Redfern. We're talking about cryptozoology. We're talking about creatures like Bigfoot, Chupacabra, Nessie. If you have a question that you'd like to talk to us about, give us a call. Next on the line, we have Brian calling us about the Texas Chupacabra. Brian, where are you calling us from?
Colorado.
Colorado? All right, Brian, what was your point that you wanted to make about the Chupacabra?
Well, it's about the Texas sighting for it. On Discovery Channel a few months ago, they ran a special on Monster Quest talking about mutant dogs. And I'm wondering if maybe that's all it is. I mean, something as totally unparanormal as something as we created,
Well, right. I was thinking that as we were talking as well, and they keep making a point of the large, long snout. And now it's taking place in Texas, Nick, isn't it? When, humans have evolved, the reason that our noses change shape is because the longer noses are usually in a more heated environment, and the long noses are so that the air can cool.
Well, you make a good point there, and Brian makes a good point also that, my personal view is that, as I mentioned earlier, that the Texas Chupacabra actually has nothing to do with the original Chupacabras on Puerto Rico. I think it's just like a brand name that's been applied to these creatures. What I would say is that, yes, I do think the Texas Chupacabras, as they've become known, are a type of dog. Some reports have said these are just completely hairless dogs.
Maybe we should change the name to Chihuahua Cabras.
Yeah, exactly. There have been other reports where veterinarians have suggested, well, it could be like a coyote crossed with a wolf or a coyote crossed with a dog or something along those lines. But the broad theory and conclusion is that these are a type of dog. Could
it be a mixture, too, with a fox? Now, is a fox part of the canid family, or is it part of a feline family? I'm not quite sure on that.
Oh, no, it's not for feline at all.
All right, so it is canid. Could it mix with a coyote?
Well, I'm not sure if a fox would or not, but I mean, certainly, you get...
Well, if the night's right and the champagne is cool enough.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you never know.
Love is in the air.
A lot of weirdness goes on in Texas. So that I'm not too sure of. But what I would say is the only kind of weird aspects relative to the Texas reports are that for some reason we're getting more and more reports of these hairless dogs. Now, you could say, okay, well, mange is rife and it's spreading. But there have been reports of these hairless dogs in other parts of the U.S. They seem particularly not frightened of people. They seem particularly aggressive. And there are some physical differences, as the police officer clearly mentioned, the fact that the back legs in many of these reports do seem longer than the front, and almost, not to the extent of like a kangaroo, but almost along those lines. Now, that's what makes me think that although I'm absolutely convinced these are dogs of some sort, or a dog cross, they seem to have other aspects going on with them rather than just losing the hair. So I'm kind of still a little bit open as to what might be causing that, at least, whether it's genetic mutations, possibly something like that.
All right, Nick, we're going to take another break, and hopefully you'll stay here with us for more questions, and hopefully all of you out there will stay with us. You're listening to The Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Steps and things bumping and banging in the middle of the night. Could it be paranormal activity? Or is it just Dave and Tim raiding your fridge?
Beer.
Strange things happen in the darkness on the edge of town.
Amen to that, brother. Welcome back to The Darkness on the Edge of Town. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. My co-host and producer, Mr. Tim Dennis. Good evening, Tim.
Good evening.
Fast show, huh? Boy, we get bumped to an extra hour, and it seems like instead of 3 hours, just not a minute over 2:57.
I blame it on the Brit.
Yeah, the Brit.
Yeah.
He's been here making it run even smoother. Are you just entranced by his lovely eyes, Mr. Adrian Lee, who's in the studio?
You're becoming professional through osmosis then?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. I'm glad I'm here.
Very good.
I think it's like that Doctor Who thing. He just takes us through the TARDIS and the 3 hours just breezes right by.
That it does. We also have another Brit on the line with us, Mr. Nick Redfern, who's an author and has a brand new book called There's Something in the Woods. I'd highly recommend you pick that up. You can check it out at all major booksellers. You can also check it out at Amazon.com or go visit nickredfern.com. His website. You can find the links there for all the books. You can give us a call and share your ideas and thoughts in the paranormal realm with us this evening. And we'll be here with you every Saturday and Sunday night from 9 to midnight Central Time. You can check us out there. Also, please, if you have questions, you can email right into the booth, and one of our lovely assistants will help you, and we'll get those questions on the air. If you're in the chat room and you have a question, private message Mr. Tim Dennis, and he will help you, and we'll get that on the air as well. Right now, we're going to go. Nick, we're going to bring on another call, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure.
On the line with us, we have Tuesday. Tuesday as an animal. Tuesday, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Long Beach, California.
Long Beach, California. Welcome to the show. Go ahead and tell us what question do you have for Nick?
Well, many times that we have spotted, of course, humans as apparitions. People who have crossed over come back as an apparition in spirit form. Some can be very realistic looking. How do we know that some of these animals or things that are sighted really are not a spirit that could come from another era? Whether it could be a dinosaur it has, we've seen all other animals in spirit come through in an apparition state, that maybe these are also doing this.
Well, that's an interesting question, yeah.
That's actually a theory that a number of researchers do actually subscribe to, Tuesday. One of the theories, for example, that's been put forward about the Loch Ness Monster, it sounds kind of, outlandish, and one of the reasons it was, I guess, put forward is because of the fact that the creature was never captured. And there are a few weird stories about people have tried to photograph it and their cameras have jammed, where it seems to have this paranormal aspect to it almost. And, people have said, is it possible it's a paranormal creature or some sort of, like a spirit-type creature in itself? And although it's not a theory that's particularly popular with a lot of mainstream cryptozoologists, there's no doubt that for every sort of 10, 20 flesh and blood type Bigfoot reports or lake monster reports we do get a handful that seem to veer more into the world of the paranormal. I've investigated a lot of these personally, particularly Bigfoot type reports, where it seems quite clear that even if Bigfoot's a flesh and blood animal, there's weirder aspects going on as well that seem more connected, for example, with the idea that some of these at least are spirit-type creatures. I mean, I'll give you a good example. There was a famous case back in England in 1879 of a Bigfoot-type creature that became known locally in central England as the man monkey. It was described as being like a large chimpanzee-type creature, for want of a better term. But there was a theory at a local level that it was actually the spirit of a man who died in a local canal, and he'd, I guess, been reincarnated as some sort of spectral monkey-like creature. Now, that sounds bizarre, but that was certainly the story that was in circulation in central England at the time. And England also has a long history of reports of so-called phantom black dogs, which they're like a Grim Reaper type creature. If you see one, it means somebody in the family or a close friend's going to die, etc. But one of the theories about these big black dogs is that they are, I guess, reincarnated souls of dead people. So, this whole theme of weird animals and reincarnation and the souls of the dead, etc., is one that's been around a long, long time. And, within cultures, folklore and mythology, it is a subject that had a lot of support.
Well, and that's a great question too, Tuesday. Thank you for asking that one, because, that does make you think. If we can see ghosts of Civil War soldiers, we can see ghosts of Roman gladiators, why wouldn't we maybe be able to see one of our precursor, ape-like men that would be walking the earth, and maybe that's how they vanish so stealthily and quickly? Is there also a lot of belief, and I know you have a second question, we'll get to that in a second here, Tuesday, but is there a lot of belief, Nick, in interdimensional transportation as well? That's what I hear a lot with Bigfoot, is that they think the reason that we don't see him is he can kind of pop in and out of dimensions, and maybe like we're a feeding ground, we're the big buffet here, and they can stop by for all the berries they want for $5.99 on Saturday nights.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is an area I've delved into deeply, and I actually think there is something to this. And, when I start on this, as I mentioned to people before, people start rolling their eyes. I think I've kind of lost the plot a little bit. But,
Right.
My own view is that there are enough weird aspects to a lot of Bigfoot cases to where we shouldn't ignore them. And, for example, there are a lot of reports of footprints, Bigfoot footprints and tracks where people have followed them, and they've just literally come to a complete halt.
Well, something to consider, too, and I don't know if you've put thought into this or other researchers, a lot of times there's that really horrible funk smell that seems to, they call them skunk apes, that follow them. And we also know in the world of the paranormal that a lot of times when purported demons or malevolent spirits make an appearance, there's kind of a scent that precludes them coming in. Maybe that's like the portal opening. Maybe that could be the scent of whatever it is coming through. Do you think that there might be any kind of correspondence with that? Because it doesn't always seem to hang there with them. It's like a blast of smell at first, and then they appear, and then a blast of smell, and they seem to be gone.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, it's one of these things where, to an extent, we're still sort of struggling with concepts and ideas. But I mean, certainly science today, is looking at the idea, for example, of different dimensions and like things like quantum physics, which may explain the existence of other dimensions and portals, and possibly some of these things could, if they're able to understand the nature of these portals, actually use them the same way we might use, literally a train or an aircraft to go from one place to another. But I'm sufficiently convinced that there are aspects to the Bigfoot mystery, at least, where even if it's a flesh and blood animal, it's still stranger than that. The idea that this creature could elude capture for centuries or thousands of years, and with all the people looking for it today, and for us not to have, really definitive photographs and footprints to suddenly stop and start and things like this, when you collectively look at that body of evidence, I think we're dealing with something stranger than just a dumb, stupid, lumbering creature wandering around.
Hey, stop talking about Tim like that. He has feelings.
Hey.
We're going to take another call here. And again, if you'd like to call in and chime in, you can give us a call. On the next line, we have Tim with us, and he has a theory on Bigfoot and the related sightings. Tim, where are you calling us from?
I'm calling from Minnesota.
Minnesota. Great, Tim. What would you like to share with us tonight?
Well, I think the human imagination, obviously, without solid physical evidence of any kind, I think it's just human emotions and imaginations that could simply turn something that, for example, a bump in the night is only that, a bump in the night, but the human imagination could turn it into something that could even, without any solid evidence, could turn it into a sighting of a Bigfoot or Chippewa bird, the dog in Texas. But I think without solid evidence of Loch Ness and unfortunately the tourist board in Ireland, that these towns exist only because the human imagination wants to believe that these things do exist. So without solid evidence, I think it's hard to even fathom whether it's plesiosaur or any kind of primate. I think primates would run into more of a human pattern as far as territorial, making the same. Places as far as...
Right, we make a lot of leaps because of the want to have these things as a part of our life. And,
Right.
I agree with you on that. And actually, some of the Bigfoot sightings, thanks a lot, Tim, for bringing that up and sharing your time with us tonight. Nick, one of the things that I've noticed on a lot of the personal sightings of Bigfoot has been the fact that a lot of people describe it almost like a big, dirty, homeless hippie and noodling around, and they're outside of the campground, again, picking on Tim, but they're outside of their campground or looking in the cabin, and they say they've got a very humanistic part of the face, but they're covered in dirty, matted hair. Do you think that could be it? It's just something as simple as people are just misjudging, kind of like the Texas Chupacabra. They're just calling this freaky big man that was standing out his window, as a Bigfoot.
Well, I don't necessarily buy that theory, but I do think there is something to the idea...
Damn it, Nick, it's my show. Buy that theory.
I do actually, joking aside, I do think there is something to the idea that, the whole image, whether people believe in Bigfoot or not, you ask anybody over the age of sort of 6 or 7, what does Bigfoot look like? And they'll say it's a big, large, hairy man. So everybody kind of is ingrained with the image of what Bigfoot looks like, or what a flying saucer looks like,
right.
Or what does an alien look like. Everybody says, oh, it's a little guy with big black eyes and a big head, because we're culturally...
Sounds like my 4-year-old.
Yeah, everybody's kind of culturally in tune with what these things look like. And I do think certainly, most cases, whether we're talking about Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, anything, most cases can be explained purely by misidentification. I actually think the number of outright malicious hoaxes that occur is actually very small. I think most people are genuine and honest in their reports, but most are still mistaken. Okay. But I think that still leaves a small core percentage of sightings. Now, where I would disagree with what the caller said to some extent is in the issue of if these are all sort of mistaken identities, why is it that it's the same things that get reported time and again, like large hairy men, long neck creatures, etc.? You would imagine we would be mistaking all sorts of things.
Well, let's explore more of that when we come back. We're listening, and we're here with the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show with our guest Nick Redfern and his new book, There's Something in the Wood. Good evening. Welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. Our guest is Mr. Nick Redfern. He's got a brand new book called There's Something in the Woods, covering topics like Bigfoot, Mothman, werewolves, chupacabras. We do have our phone lines open if you're interested in being a part of the show with us tonight. Our phone number. Nick, let's talk a little bit more about the different things that have been seen out there. Now, have you actually had an experience where you have seen for yourself a Bigfoot character, in what you believe to be the flesh?
I've had a couple of weird experiences. One actually in the woods of a place called Cannock Chase, which is in central England, where there have been a lot of weird reports of everything from big cats on the loose to Bigfoot-type creatures and a whole range of weird animals. And I actually did have one weird experience where I saw momentarily like a pair of red eyes. Now, how you interpret that is open to interpretation.
Right.
Because the Cannock Chase is home to things like deer, foxes, and creatures like that. And, people have quite legitimately said, yes, you're looking for these creatures, but you have to be aware that there are just normal animals out there as well. And that's quite true. So I've had that was actually one weird experience where I sort of flittingly saw some shadowy things and saw like a fleeting glimpse of a couple of red eyes. But, what that means, I'll be the first to admit that, I just don't know. I couldn't put it that definitively.
What do you think of all the cryptids that are out there? The Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, there's like a pterodactyl-like creature that's flying over, is it New Guinea or something like that? There's all these different... What do you think has the best chance of actually being something that we're going to find true definitive evidence of?
Well, there's one actually in Russia, which is known as the Almasty, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we didn't resolve that. Now, the Almasty has been, in simple terms, described as like a so-called British Bigfoot. Russian Bigfoot.
British Bigfoot on vacation.
Like as a Russian Bigfoot. But actually, many of the witnesses have described it as almost being like a primitive human, but larger. And, a friend of mine named Hr.3, who's basically does what I do, but in England, he actually just last month went to Russia for about 3 weeks looking for this creature. Richard's a professional zoologist. He was a former head keeper at an English zoo. And he came back with a lot of evidence suggesting that this might be some sort of like a proto-human type creature that has survived extinction and still lives in the mountains of Russia.
Well, what a lot of people forget, too, Nick, is that the mountain gorilla, that was only discovered within the last 200 years, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of creatures that, science has heard rumors of for a long, long time, but actually weren't definitively classified until, very, very recently. The mountain gorillas, the giant panda, creatures like that. For example, then in the 1930s, off the coast of South Africa, a coelacanth was discovered, this large fish, after presumably being extinct, or presumed by science to be extinct, for literally millions of years. And, even today we're finding things like giant squids and things like that in the ocean. So I wouldn't be surprised possibly if occasionally, things might wash up on a shore somewhere that's, are really weird and that we maybe have not seen or classified before. That wouldn't surprise me. As more time passes by, I am becoming more convinced by the idea that we're not going to find Bigfoot because it's beyond kind of weird. There's some stranger aspects to it. And I think, unfortunately...
What do you mean? Be specific with that. What do you mean by
that?
There's stranger aspects to it? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, some of these paranormal issues where people have tried to photograph it and the cameras have jammed or the footprints have just come to a halt as if it's just vanished. There are even a few stories that I've uncovered, or been given to me, I should say, where people have said they've been driving home late at night. They've seen this huge ape-like creature cross the road in front of them, and as that's happened, literally either their engine or the headlights have gone out on the car. Now, as I've said to people before, you either have to dismiss these accounts as the work of cranks and hoaxers, but then again, you have to think, well, if the people don't want publicity, they don't want their name using, they insist on complete anonymity, and they don't want the story publishing, where's the motivation for coming up with a hoax? So, I mean, a lot of mainstream cryptozoologists don't like this paranormal angle, particularly as it relates to Bigfoot. However, I think there are sufficient reports to suggest that there's this aspect to it, and I think that's why we may have trouble solving this mystery. Now, I think, unfortunately, some of the more, or the legitimate flesh and blood animals, I think, the way the world's going and resources being used up, unfortunately, some of these may actually become extinct before we actually resolve what they are. That would be kind of the tragedy if we're looking for these things, and the reason why we're not getting to the bottom of the mystery is because they're on an evolutionary decline, and perhaps, in 10, 20, 30 years, they'll all be gone before we've successfully solved the mystery. So.
Well, a lot of Native American cultures have their versions of Bigfoot and these creatures, and they seem very in tune, the Native American culture, with, environment and with evolution and everything that's kind of going on around them. Why do you think that we haven't seen more definitive proof of that as well? You would think the Native Americans at this point would have some kind of proof to show us, a paw or, something that they've given, or do you think that's because they're in sync with these creatures and the earth that they respect them, each other, and there's nothing going on? They're going to kind of keep the secret of the Bigfoot and Yeti as well.
30, 40, 50 years.
Sorry, we lost you there for a second, Nick. What was that?
Yeah, I was just saying that, you're quite right in the first respect that Native American cultures, have had these legends and stories of Bigfoot for centuries. The media tends to take the approach that it's just been something that's surfaced in the last 40 or 50 years, pop culture, etc. But if you look back into historical literature and legends and tales, many, if not all, Native American cultures had these stories about these large, wild, hairy giants and hairy men of the woods, etc. They weren't called Bigfoot hundreds of years ago, but certainly the stories existed. Right. Now, there are some stories of Native American legends where they kind of revered these creatures, which in some respects suggested they weren't normal creatures. And this is one of the things I come back to, that they were perceived as being something unusual about them. Now, that may just be because they looked imposing, and legends surrounding them grew. But certainly, there are people who talk about, Native Americans who are talking about Bigfoot, being kind of like in tune with nature and the earth and sort of a wise creature, not just, a
dumb,
an ape
lumbering
or
animal,
something
right?
like that, yeah.
Well, some of the stories, too, and we'll take our next caller, Randy, in a minute here. Some of the stories that we've heard on Bigfoot sightings is they do seem to be prevalent around heavily viewed UFO sighting areas as well. Have you found a correlation with that?
Well,
and do you think
I've
that maybe
read
they
about a
could
lot
be
of
an
those.
alien,
Yeah.
actually?
I haven't actually personally although I've investigated a lot of reports that suggest like a paranormal angle, I haven't personally investigated a lot which have got a definitive UFO link to them.
Mm-hmm.
However, one thing I would say is that right here in Texas, just outside Houston, there's a large area of forest called the Big Thicket. Now, the Big Thicket...
And that's where Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, too, live, right? No, sorry,
maybe.
That's just the Big Woods, I think.
That I don't know. But in the Big Thicket, which is this large area of woodland, there's a lot of reports of Bigfoot-type creatures. Actually, a friend of mine named Rob Riggs wrote a whole book about the Bigfoot reports in this area. But what's interesting is the Big Thicket is also home to this thing known as the ghost light, which is very similar to the more famous Martha lights. These weird balls of light, anywhere from the size of a tennis ball to, I guess, a basketball, flitting through the woods at high speed. Nobody really knows what they are, but they've been seen in many respects in exactly the same locations where the Bigfoot-type creatures have been seen in the Big Thicket. Now, Rob's book discusses some of the correlations that might explain this and what might be going on. So, in one respect, that is kind of, these are by definition UFOs, these small balls of light. They're not alien spacecraft by any means, I don't believe, but there seems to be some correlation with these balls of light flying around the Big Thicket and the Bigfoot reports. So, that's sort of a similar avenue, I guess.
All right, well, we're going to take our last break here, and then we'll come back. We'll take Randy's call. And if you have a call you'd like to share with us and you have some questions for Nick Redfern, give us a call. You're listening to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show.
Try not to fall asleep. We'll only give you nightmares. Welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. You're listening to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio. We're going to be here with you every Saturday and Sunday night from 9 to midnight. Got a couple more questions coming in. Nick, let's go ahead and check this. We got, as I mentioned, we were talking about the correlation of UFOs and Bigfoot, and Randy is online with us. And Randy, you have a question about Bigfoot and Mars?
Yes, actually, I do. I saw...
Where are you calling from, Randy?
I'm calling from South Dakota.
Okay, great.
Saw some pictures that were taken in 2004 by the Mars Explorer Spirit, and it shows what appears to be a Bigfoot walking across the face of Mars. Now, I really didn't have much of a question. I just kind of wanted to know if you knew anything about this, or if you if there was any correlation between what we were just talking about, with UFOs and Bigfoot.
I actually did see this picture. It was one that was sort of all over the world's media a few months ago. One of the Martian probes had taken this...
Thanks for calling in, Randy.
Oh, thank you.
Taken this photograph of what looks like a shadowy, dark figure striding across the Martian landscape. Now, people said, "Oh, it's Bigfoot on Mars," which kind of sounds a bit outlandish. But I mean, it does look like a human figure. There's no doubt about that, and it's dark coloured. It looks like a head, shoulders, arm, and torso, etc. And there've been lots of theories and speculation as to what it is or what it isn't. And I think unfortunately, like a lot of photographs, it's one of these things where we're never really going to be able to resolve it, I don't think, to any real satisfaction, because it's just a photograph. It's like one of the previous callers said, until we actually get the body, we're always going to be wondering, are we just interpreting something, based on the way we're visually perceiving it? Or
Nick, it's Adrian here. Did you think it's a case that, almost like Matrixing, you're wanting to see a figure there? If there's like rock formations and it's casting a shadow on the Mars surface with the hot sun shining down there, are we almost looking to find these images in amongst those formations?
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. I think, you make a good point there, Adrian, the fact that our mind is attuned to looking for things that either consciously or unconsciously that we recognize. So, if we look, for example, at a rock and it seems to have a face in it, we think it's a face because we recognize what a face is supposed to look like. And I think that actually does come into play quite a lot in some of these cases where, you look at a rock formation or a shadow, or somebody says, they've seen the Virgin Mary in a Dorito or whatever.
That's on eBay for $35,000 right now.
Yeah, it's like somebody stirs a cup of tea and says they can see the face of whatever in the milk.
Right.
To me, I don't put much credit in that. I think it is just how we're interpreting things. So I think that's an important point to make out. Okay. But what this Martian figure is or isn't, I just don't know.
Now we've got another caller online. We have Chad. Chad, where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm calling from Princeton.
From Princeton? And Chad, what's your question tonight?
I was wondering, you guys talk about the Loch Ness Monster.
Right.
And I was wondering, how would you go about getting away from that? If you were stuck in that situation, how would you get away?
From the Loch Ness Monster?
Yeah, if you, let's say you were swimming in that lake and you happened to see it, how would you get away?
Well, a lot of people might be surprised the fact that most people actually don't go swimming in Loch Ness, primarily because it's a huge body of water. I've been out on Loch Ness quite a few times, and it's, it can be a rough body of water. It's not like a small lake you can swim across. It's 22 miles long and a mile wide. It's a big body of water. So most people are actually on the loch, are on boats, or whatever, similar things, whether large boats or small boats. I guess if you're near the shore or something like that, then perhaps you would need to be more careful. There are one or two reports, as I said earlier, actually a handful of reports of people seeing this creature on the shore, but for the most part, people have said that as they closed in their car or whatever, it just literally splashed back into the water, as it was more of a timid creature rather than, something that was violent and was going to attack anyone. I'm not actually aware, other than one kind of legendary report from the literally more than 1,000 years ago of St. Columba, this legend of supposedly, when a man was attacked, actually near the River Ness rather than Loch Ness, but which has become incorporated into the Loch Ness legend. Other than that, there aren't really any reports of people having really been attacked by this creature or similar.
Is it worth mentioning, Nick, for our American cousins, how cold that loch actually is? It's not somewhere you want to be swimming, is it?
Not exactly, not unless you've got, you're particularly interested in dying very, very quickly. No, it's a very, Scotland is in the northern part of Britain, sort of a windswept cold area, perhaps at the best of times, and not the place to go swimming in by any means. It's not like a 200-foot long lake that you can just wade across or whatever, or swim across with your friends for a bet, that sort of thing. It's a huge body of water.
Well, we've got about 3 minutes left, Nick. Let's talk a little bit more about your book. It's out. There's Something in the Woods. What exactly do you cover in the book, and what can we tell people about this book?
Okay, well, it's basically, I guess, like a 2-year road trip of me traveling around various parts of Britain and the US, investigating various reports and speaking with a lot of witnesses. And one of the areas it covers that we haven't really delved into tonight are these mysterious large winged creatures. For example, the US has a long history of sightings of Thunderbird-type creatures, a lot of pterodactyl-type reports from the Texas-Mexico border, interestingly enough, and Mothman-type reports. So it covers a lot of those grounds, what I call so-called winged things. And also werewolf-type creatures. A lot of people talk about werewolves, they automatically think of, Hollywood movies and people sprouting fangs and hair at the sight of a full moon. But, the joking and the light-hearted side aside, we do get a lot of reports from the U.S. of people seeing large wolf-like creatures that, sort of fit a classic werewolf description. And a lot of those in the U.S. have been reported around Native American burial mounds and some of these effigy mounds that have been reported and found in the U.S. And again, that's led to speculation that these aren't necessarily flesh and blood animals. So I cover that quite a lot of Bigfoot material, and quite a bit actually about the Big Thicket area in Texas that I mentioned earlier. So.
All right. And again, people can check your websites. Do you like them to share their stories with you if they've had an encounter with a Bigfoot or a cryptozoological beast?
Yeah, I'm always, if somebody sees something, they've got questions, and, they're trying to find out what happened, what they saw, if anyone can, help them in any way, I'm always quite happy to do that. I'm one of these people, I always think it's important to give something back to the people who contact me. I'm not one of these snobby authors who avoids his fan mail. If people write to me, I always try and get back to them within 24 hours and give a full, in-depth reply. So.
Right, and people can reach you by going right to your website at nickredfern.com, and that's Nick, REDFERN.com?
Correct, yeah.
Well, Nick, thank you very much for joining us here in the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. We appreciate you spending your time with us this evening.
All right, thanks, guys, and thanks to everybody who called in as well.
Yes, thank you very much to all of the listeners that spent their time with us this evening, both in the chat room, calling in, and being a part of it. If you missed the beginning part of the show or any part of the show, it's already up on podcast on the website. You can go to check out the podcasts there. Also, go to take the keyword darkness to check out our webpage. And we encourage you also to keep checking up darknessradio.com website for all the updates. Remember to check out next week. We're going to be back with 2 brand new shows. We're going to be talking to the real ghost whisperer. Marianne Winkowski is making a return to our show, talking about paranormal activity, the return of the TV show Ghost Whisperer, and she's also going to be taking some of your calls and telling you if you do have a ghost in your home. Thanks for listening.